She didn't even see it coming. 1 second, Nia Bellamy was standing at the edge of the ballroom, champagne glass in hand, trying to remind herself that she belonged there just as much as anyone else. The next second, Vivian Harrow's shoulder connected, with hers hard, deliberate, unmistakable, and the glass shattered across the marble floor like a gunshot. Then Vivian turned to the crowd with a slow, poisonous smile and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "Security. I think we have a problem." And just like that, a room full of Chicago's most powerful people turned to stare at Nia, not with concern, not with questions, but with the particular hunger of people who have never once been the one standing on the wrong side of a moment like this. If that were you standing there, what would you have done? Before we go any further, if stories like this one move you, challenge you, or make your blood boil in all the right ways, please subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. We release powerful stories every week, and you don't want to miss a single one. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that ballroom, because what happened next changed everything. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, tucked inside a plain white envelope that Nia almost threw away. It wasn't the kind of mail she received regularly. Her desk at the Southside Community Housing Initiative was usually buried under intake forms, utility disconnection notices, eviction paperwork, and handwritten notes from families who didn't have email addresses. The envelope looked too clean, too deliberate, too out of place, sitting on top of a stack of rent assistance applications. She almost set it aside for Marcus, her office manager, to deal with. She almost left it for tomorrow. She almost didn't open it at all. But something made her slide her thumb under the seal. The Valancourt Hotel Foundation cordially invites the Southside Community Housing Initiative to the annual Benefactors Gala in recognition of your organization's outstanding service to the greater Chicago community. Nia read it twice. Then she sat back in her chair and laughed, not the warm kind, but the sharp, tired kind that comes out when something surprises you in a way that feels like it might also hurt. She hadn't applied for anything. She hadn't submitted a nomination. Someone on the charity committee had apparently heard about their work, probably from Councilwoman Diaz, who had visited their office 3 months ago, who had visited their outlets and spent 40 minutes listening to Nia explain the city's current tenant relocation policy was essentially organized abandonment, and decided the initiative deserved a seat at a table where she had never in her life sat before. It should have felt like good news. It did feel like good news. But Nia had grown up on the South Side, and she had learned early that certain rooms have very specific ideas about who belongs inside them. And those ideas rarely include a black woman in her 30s who still occasionally ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, because the initiative's budget didn't leave much room for anything else. She told herself that was a ridiculous thing to think about. She told herself that if she was going to spend the next 10 years fighting for families who had been made to feel like they didn't belong anywhere, she could spend one evening in a hotel ballroom without psyching herself out about it. She called her sister Denise that night and told her about the invitation. Denise said, "Oh my God, Nia, that's amazing. What are you going to wear?" That was the question that kept her up until 2 in the morning. She settled on a dark green dress she'd bought 18 months ago for a friend's wedding. It was good fabric, well made, fitted in a way that she'd felt genuinely beautiful in when she'd tried it on at the store. It didn't cost what the women at that gala would spend on their shoes, and she knew it, and she told herself that was fine. She told herself that a lot. Getting ready alone in her apartment on the night of the gala, Nia Bellamy stood in front of her bathroom mirror for a long time. She was not a woman who doubted herself easily. She had sat across from city aldermen who didn't want to look at her and made them look. She had walked into bank offices where loans officers talked to the walls instead of her face and stayed in her chair until they answered her questions. She had knocked on the doors of families who'd been told they were worthless by institutions designed to make them feel exactly that way, and she had sat with them at kitchen tables and helped them fight back. She was not a woman who apologized for taking up space. But standing in her bathroom that night, she smoothed the front of the green dress one more time and she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Something she didn't have a clean word for. Something between bracing and grief. She picked up her small black clutch and walked out the door. The Valancourt Hotel was exactly what its name suggested. The kind of place where everything gleams, where the doormen have earpieces and the flower arrangements cost more than Nia's monthly rent, where the lighting is engineered to make certain people look luminous and powerful, and the whole architecture is designed, whether anyone admits it or not, to make other people feel exactly what Nia felt stepping out of her lift onto the rain-wet pavement outside, small. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk, taking it in. The lobby visible through the glass doors, the women in gowns, the men in custom black tie, the chandeliers that looked like they'd been assembled by hand over several centuries. She squared her shoulders. She walked in. The first hour was fine. Not magical, not the kind of evening she'd daydream about. But fine, she found the gala coordinator, a flustered woman named Patricia, who seemed genuinely glad to see her, and walked her through the room, explaining the program for the evening and pointing out where the donation ceremony would take place. She found a spot near the edge of the room where she could watch the crowd, without feeling like she was in the middle of it. She ate 2 canapés that tasted like nothing she could identify, but were apparently expensive. She made small talk with a retired professor named Dr. Aldridge, who ran a literacy program on the North Side and who seemed as genuinely bewildered by the gala's atmosphere as she was. They talked for 20 minutes about the city's chronic underfunding of early education, and Nia found herself actually relaxing, just slightly, the way you do when you find one real person in a room full of performances. Then Dr. Aldridge's wife appeared at his elbow, and they drifted away, and Nia was alone again. And that was when Vivian Harrow noticed her. Nia didn't know who Vivian was yet. She would learn the name later. In that first moment, she was simply aware of a group of women moving through the room, with the particular energy of people who have never in their lives needed to wonder whether they belonged somewhere. There were 4 of them, late 20s to mid-30s, gowns that looked like architecture, jewelry that caught the light in ways that seemed almost as aggressive. The kind of confidence that doesn't come from anything you've built, it comes from knowing that the room was built for you. The woman at the center was taller than the others, with dark blonde hair and cheekbones that suggested either extraordinary genetics or extraordinary money, probably both. She moved through the gala like she owned it, because in several meaningful ways, through her family, she did. Nia clocked the group, made a private assessment, looked away. She did not look away fast enough. "I'm sorry, are you one of the catering staff?" The voice was pleasant, perfectly modulated. The kind of pleasant that has a blade inside it. Nia turned. The blonde woman was standing closer than she'd expected, with one of her friends just slightly behind her left shoulder, the formation of someone who has done this before and wants a witness. "No," Nia said. "Simple, steady." "Oh," the woman tilted her head. Looked at Nia with an expression of theatrical confusion. "I just assumed. I didn't see a name tag." "Gala attendees don't wear name tags," Nia said. Something flickered in the woman's eyes. Not embarrassment. Something colder. "Of course," she said. "I'm Vivian. Vivian Harrow." She said it the way people say a name when they expect you to react to it. Nia kept her expression neutral. "Nia Bellamy. And you're here with?" Vivian left the question open, the way you leave a trap open. "With the Southside Community Housing Initiative," Nia said. "We're receiving a donation this evening." Vivian smiled. It was a beautiful smile, and it didn't reach her eyes by about 6 inches. "How wonderful," she said. "What a lovely dress." Nia had been given exactly that kind of compliment before. The kind where the adjective is a knife and the noun is the wound. "Thank you," she said, because she was not going to let this woman see her flinch. Vivienne didn't walk away. That was the thing Nia would think about later. Most people who open with a test, who take that first soft swing to see what comes back, they move on if you don't give them anything. They find someone else. The cruelty is opportunistic, not committed. Vivian stayed, and slowly over the next 10 minutes, more of her friends drifted over. The group expanded, the comments shifted. No longer single-targeted strikes. Now it was something more like a performance. The dress became a topic of observation. Nia's body became something to be remarked upon with the thin veil of concern that privileged women sometimes use when they want to say something vicious without saying it directly. There's a wonderful boutique on Michigan Avenue that does gorgeous work in fuller silhouettes. I think it's so inspiring that your organization is represented here tonight. It's important for people from all backgrounds to see how philanthropy works. You must feel so out of your element. Don't worry, everyone here is very open-minded. Each one landed. Nia absorbed them. She kept her spine straight and her face composed, the way she had learned to do in 100 rooms where she was the only one who looked like her. She did not argue. She did not perform discomfort. She simply stood there, present and unbroken, and she met each comment with the kind of quiet that costs a great deal. Inside, something was burning, but she did not let it show. Not yet. She had worked too long and cared too much about why she was in that room to let Vivian Harrow reduce this night to a scene. Then Vivian made it a scene anyway. It happened fast, the way cruelties often do. One moment, Nia was holding her champagne glass. The next, Vivian's shoulder connected with hers, not an accident, not a brush, but a deliberate, committed impact, and the glass left Nia's hand and hit the marble floor and shattered. Heads turned across the ballroom. Vivian stepped back and pressed her hand to her chest with an expression of perfect, practiced shock. "Oh my God," she said. She turned to the nearest security guard, who had appeared as if materialized by the sound. "Did you see that?" She just threw her glass. "I didn't throw anything," Nia said. Her voice was even, measured, the same voice she used when she was sitting across from people who wanted her to lose control. "There are people everywhere," Vivian said to the security guard, ignoring Nia completely. "This is a charity event. I don't know how she even got in here." One of Vivian's friends, the one who had been shadowing her all night, shook her head with theatrical sadness. "Someone should check the guest list." "I'm on the guest list," Nia said. "Of course you are," Vivian said, smiling again. And then, quieter, angled so her friends could hear, but her voice wouldn't carry too far. They had to let someone in who could carry the champagne. The laughter that came from Vivian's circle was soft and deliberate, the kind designed to sound like warmth from a distance while gutting you up close. Nia's jaw tightened. She looked at the security guard. He was young, maybe 25, and he was staring at her with the particular uncertainty of someone who hasn't been told how to handle a situation like this, but has a very strong instinct about whose side he's supposed to be on. That instinct was not on Nia's side. She could feel it. She could also feel the eyes, the shift in the room. The particular quality of attention that gathers around a scene, in a place like this, not outrage, not concern, not even genuine interest. Just the animal awareness that something is happening, and the collective decision to watch rather than act. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody said anything. Half a dozen phones appeared in hands across the nearest cluster of guests. Nia stood very still in the center of it, and then it got worse. Because Vivian Harrow was not finished. She reached up to her wrist and then stopped. And her expression changed into something that Nia would later describe to her sister as the most deliberate performance she had ever witnessed from someone who wasn't on a stage. Vivian looked at her wrist, then at the table behind her, then at Nia. "My bracelet," she said. Her voice was different now. Still controlled, but with a new edge. The edge of accusation that is pretending to be distress. "What bracelet?" one of her friends asked, playing the part with practiced ease. "The diamond bracelet. I had it on when we were talking." Vivian's eyes stayed on Nia. "It's gone." The security guard went rigid. Across the ballroom, the ambient noise dropped by several degrees. "Ma'am," the guard said carefully, looking at Nia, "would you mind if we—" "You want to search my bag?" Nia said. It wasn't a question. "It's just procedure. You want to search my bag," Nia said again. Not louder, just clearer. She looked at the room, at the phones, at the faces watching from a safe distance, the faces of people who had given money to causes that had her name on their letterhead, who had said words at dinners about equity and inclusion and the importance of supporting underserved communities. who were now standing in complete silence, while a black woman was about to be accused of theft at a charity gala. She unclipped her clutch and held it open. The security guard stepped forward and went through it. Keys, lip balm, a folded copy of her speech for the donation ceremony, her speech, the one she had rewritten 4 times because she wanted it to be right, because the money mattered, because the families mattered. Her phone, a small pack of tissues, a receipt from the lift. No bracelet. The guard looked up. Vivian's expression didn't change. Maybe she handed it off, one of her friends said. Check her pockets, said someone from the gathered crowd, a man's voice, someone Nia couldn't even see. I don't have pockets, Nia said, and she almost laughed, because the green dress had no pockets, and in another context, in another moment, that would have been its own small injustice worth complaining about. But right now it was almost funny, except it wasn't funny at all. A physical search, Vivian said to the security guard, quietly. Firmly, I'm requesting a physical search. She could have tucked it anywhere. The guard's jaw moved. Nia looked at him. She had been in rooms where she was outnumbered before. She had been in rooms where the system was pointed at her before. She had helped families who knew this particular feeling, the feeling of an institution preparing to move against you, slowly and with paperwork, like a glacier, inevitable and cold. She knew the difference between a moment you could fight and a moment you had to survive. But she also knew herself, and she knew exactly where her line was. She drew it. No, she said. The word was quiet. Absolute. You can embarrass me. You have embarrassed me. You've done everything in your power to make this room look at me like I'm something you stepped in. Her voice didn't crack. She wouldn't let it crack. But you will not touch my body. You will not strip away my dignity. Not for a bracelet that I did not take. Not for a story that is not true. Not tonight. The ballroom was so quiet she could hear the chandeliers. Vivian's smile had the particular quality of a woman who has already won and is simply enjoying the last few seconds before the finish. Remove her, she said to the guard. The guard reached out. And then a voice came from somewhere above. Low, unhurried. The kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud to stop a room cold. Take your hands off her. Nobody moved. Not the guard. Not Vivienne. Not the guests with their phones. Nia turned. On the mezzanine above the ballroom, Kent was standing at the railing. She hadn't noticed him before. She didn't know how long he'd been there. He was dressed in black, jacket on, completely still, the way someone stands when they have nowhere they need to be and no one they need to impress. He began walking toward the staircase, and something extraordinary happened. The room changed, not because of anything he said, not because of anything he did yet, just the act of him moving, descending those stairs, crossing toward the edge of that crowd. Something in the room shifted. Businessmen straightened. Vivian's friends exchanged a look that Nia couldn't read but felt like the first real uncertainty she had seen from any of them all night. Even the security guard took a half step back. Nia didn't know this man. But the room did. And whatever it knew had just tilted every calculation in that ballroom. He reached the bottom of the stairs. He crossed the floor. He moved through the crowd the way water moves through cracks, not forcing, not asking, just finding the space that opens because it has no other choice. He stopped beside her. He was taller than she'd realized from the mezzanine. Late 30s, dark eyes that were doing several things at once, reading the room, clocking the phones, registering Vivian, registering the guard. He looked at Nia with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who is deciding something. Are you hurt? He asked. Just that. Not are you okay, which is what people say when they want you to say yes and make it easy. Just, are you hurt? Nia shook her head. He reached up and pulled off his jacket. He placed it around her shoulders. Then he turned to face the room. And everything that came before, every cruel comment, every laugh, every phone raised to capture someone else's humiliation, was about to become a very different kind of story. Because Roman Caldero had been watching from the beginning, and he had seen everything. The first thing Roman Caldero did was nothing. That was the part nobody in that ballroom expected. He stood beside Nia with his jacket across her shoulders, and he simply looked at Vivienne Harrow. No speech, no posturing. Just a long, flat, almost clinical look. The kind that strips a room down to its bare components, who has power, who is borrowing it, and who is about to lose it entirely. Vivian held his gaze for about 4 seconds, before her eyes moved sideways. She caught herself and forced them back, but the damage was done. Everyone standing within 20 feet had seen it. The security guard had taken 2 steps back without appearing to realize he'd moved. "Mr. Caldero," he said. His voice had changed completely. A minute ago, he'd been firm, leaning into the situation, buttressed by Vivienne's certainty. Now he sounded like a man who has just understood that he has been standing in the wrong spot. "I wasn't aware you were. We didn't know you were attending this evening." "I wasn't on the program," Roman said. He didn't look at the guard when he said it. He was still looking at Vivienne. Vivienne laughed. It was practiced and light, and it cost her something to produce it. "Roman," she said, like they were old friends, like the previous 10 minutes hadn't happened, like there wasn't a shattered champagne glass on the floor 6 feet away. "I didn't see you upstairs. I didn't realize you were watching." "I know," Roman said. 2 words, she absorbed them. "Well," she gestured broadly, a hostess's gesture, a woman reclaiming her room. "There's obviously been some confusions here tonight. A misunderstanding. I'm sure we can— Where's the bracelet, Vivienne?" The question landed, like something dropped from a significant height. Vivienne's smile didn't disappear. It just stopped moving. Fixed, like a photograph of a smile rather than an actual one. "I'm sorry? The bracelet you said was stolen." Roman's voice hadn't changed in temperature or volume. He wasn't performing anger. He was asking a question the way you ask a question when you already know the answer, and you're giving someone a very specific, very limited opportunity to tell the truth before that opportunity closes. "Where is it?" "That's what I'm trying to determine." "This woman, her name is Nia Bellamy," Roman said. "She runs the Southside Community Housing Initiative. She was searched. Nothing was found, so I'll ask again." He paused. "Just slightly. Where is the bracelet?" Vivienne's friends had formed a loose cluster behind her, the way people cluster when they're not sure if they're witnesses or participants, and they're trying to leave themselves room to claim either. One of them, the one who had been shadowing Vivienne all night, a thin redhead in a silver dress, had her phone in her hand, but the screen was dark. She was very still. "I don't know where it is," Vivienne said. "That's the entire point. Someone took it. And you believe that someone was Ms. Bellamy. Based on what exactly?" The question was simple. Direct. And Vivienne had no clean answer to it. Because she was standing here, and she was the wrong kind of person, and I wanted to see what would happen, was not an answer she could give in front of 40 witnesses. "She was standing closest to me," Vivienne said. "When I reached for my glass, I noticed it was gone." "The proximity. The ballroom has been full of people since 7 o'clock, Roman said. "You've been standing in the same section for most of that time. By proximity, you could implicate approximately 60 people." He looked at her steadily. "You chose to implicate her specifically." The redhead in silver took a quiet half-step backward. Vivienne's jaw shifted. The hostess' smile was gone now, replaced by something harder underneath it, the actual face beneath the performance, and it was not a pleasant face. It was the face of a woman who has never in her adult life been publicly cornered and doesn't know what to do with the feeling. "I don't know who you think you're talking to," she said. "Do you know whose daughter I am?" "Yes," Roman said. "Graham Harrow's." He said it flatly, without weight, without the reverence the name expected. Vivienne's chin lifted. "Then you know that my family has been involved with this hotel's charity foundation for 11 years. My family funded the East Wing renovation. I own the hotel," Roman said. The silence that came after that statement was a different kind of silence than the one that had filled the room when he'd first spoken from the mezzanine. That silence had been shock. This one was something else. This was the sound of a room recalculating. Nia felt it. Standing beside this man she didn't know, wearing his jacket, she felt the entire social architecture of the evening flex and groan like a building in wind. Vivienne had gone very still. "The Valancourt is held through a property trust," Roman continued. "Caldero Hospitality Group has owned it for 6 years. which means every corridor, every public space in this ballroom. He gestured upward, almost casually, toward the discrete black domes mounted in the upper corners of the room, is covered by our security infrastructure. Vivienne followed his gesture. She looked at the cameras. And for the first time all night, Nia watched something genuine cross Vivienne Harrow's face. Not the manufactured shock, not the practiced contempt. Something real and involuntary, something that started in the eyes, before the rest of her face could organize a response. Fear, raw and honest and almost ugly in how quickly it surfaced. "I want to see the footage," Roman said to the security guard. Not to Vivienne. Done with Vivienne, at least for the moment. He looked at the guard with the particular patience of a man who gives instructions rarely and expects them to be executed fully. The past 40 minutes, this section of the ballroom. The guard was already reaching for his radio. It took 11 minutes. Nia knew because she counted them. Or rather, she was aware of time passing with the specific crawling quality that time has when you are standing in the center of something that hasn't finished happening yet. And every second feels like it's being stretched to accommodate more tension than it was designed to hold. Roman didn't speak to her during those 11 minutes. He didn't make conversation. He didn't explain himself or his motivations or what he expected to happen next. He stood beside her with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that silence is its own form of pressure, and he watched the room. The room watched back. Vivienne had moved to her original table with her group. They were talking in low voices, and whatever was being said had the quality of a conversation that was trying very hard to look like it wasn't a strategy session. The redhead in silver was doing most of the talking. At one point, she leaned close to Vivienne and said something that made Vivienne's expression shift. Not relief, but calculation. A recalibration. Across the ballroom, Nia noticed a heavy-set man in his late 60s who had been standing near the bar watching the entire proceeding. He had white hair and the kind of face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago, and was now just powerful, thick jaw, steady eyes, the bearing of a man who is used to other people solving problems before they reach him. He hadn't moved. He hadn't intervened. Was watching Roman the way you watch something you're not sure is a threat yet, but you're not willing to dismiss. Nia didn't know who he was. She filed the face away. A hotel technician arrived with a tablet. He spoke quietly to Roman, turned the screen, and Roman looked at it with the same unhurried attention he gave everything. "Put it on the screens," Roman said. The technician hesitated. "Sir, the main screens are set for the presentations. After that, use them." Roman looked at the technician. Please. That please, Nia thought, was doing a significant amount of work. It was the please of a man who says it once and means it and will not say it again. The technician nodded and moved off quickly. Roman turned to Nia. "This is going to be uncomfortable," he said. "For you, and for several other people in this room. I want to be transparent about that." Nia looked at him directly. She had not yet decided what to make of him. There was something that felt genuinely functional about him. Not warm, exactly, but not cold either. More like a man who had removed performance from his personality so completely that what remained was just intent, just the actual thing underneath, without the coating. "It's already been uncomfortable," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "Fair enough," he said. When the footage came up on the ballroom screens, the room's ambient noise dropped to nothing inside 3 seconds. The gala chairman, a silver-haired man named Hartwell, who had been circulating the room all evening with the distracted energy of someone managing 17 things, simultaneously stopped, mid-conversation, and stared at the main screen behind the stage. Around him, guests turned. Phones that had been raised to capture Nia's humiliation were now being used to record something else entirely. The footage was clear. Hotel security systems at the Valancourt were not decorative. The cameras were high-resolution, well-positioned, and the timestamp in the lower right corner was precise down to the second. The first clip showed the moment of impact. Not a brush. Not an accident. Not even a particularly convincing piece of theater. Vivienne's shoulder turned deliberately into Nia's, her body weight shifted forward into the movement. The contact was intentional and sustained for a full second before the glass left Nia's hand. You could see, in the 2 seconds before impact, Vivian's eyes cut sideways to verify the positions of her friends, to confirm she had witnesses who were looking. A sound moved through the ballroom. Not gasps exactly. Something lower and more collective. The sound of a room that has been watching something and is now seeing it differently. Vivian was on her feet. "That doesn't show anything," she said, and her voice had lost its modulation, the careful social music of it, replaced by something raw and slightly too high. "That's completely out of context. She was standing in the way, and I—" "Keep watching," Roman said. Not to her, to the room. The second clip loaded. This one was from a different camera. A wider angle, covering the section of tables, near where Vivian and her group had been stationed before they'd approached Nia. The timestamp showed it was 8 minutes before the confrontation. Vivian alone for a moment at the table, reaching into her clutch, pulling out a diamond bracelet, looking left, looking right, then reaching forward and pressing the bracelet down into the centerpiece arrangement on the table, a tall floral display with enough density to swallow a piece of jewelry, whole with the focused, deliberate efficiency of someone who has planned this exact movement. The silence in that ballroom was total. Nia stood very still. She was looking at the screen. She was watching the footage the same way everyone else was watching it, but from a different angle from the inside. From the angle of someone who had stood with that accusation, attached to her name in front of 200 people, who had felt the security guard's hand move toward her arm, who had felt the eyes and the phones and the absolute, desolate isolation of a room deciding that she was the kind of person things like this happened to. Her throat was tight. She was not going to cry in this ballroom. She had decided that in the first 30 seconds of the confrontation, and she was holding to it with everything she had. But her hands, crossed in front of her, were gripping each other hard enough to leave marks. "That's you can't." Vivian's voice was somewhere between rage and something close to panic. "That could be anything. That doesn't prove." "Vivian." The new voice came from across the room. Deep, measured. The voice of a man who has spent decades in rooms where how you say something's as much as what you say. The heavyset man with white hair, whom Nia had noticed by the bar, was moving toward them now. Moving with the particular kind of controlled urgency that powerful men use when they're trying to manage a situation without appearing to rush. Graham Harrow. Nia put the name to the face at the same moment she understood fully, completely, with the cold clarity of a thing snapping into focus, that the man walking toward them was Vivian's father. And that the expression on his face was not the expression of a father coming to defend his daughter. It was the expression of a man coming to contain damage. "Vivian," he said again quieter, when he reached the group. "Enough. Dad." She turned to him with something that Nia recognized as genuine, the raw, stripped-down appeal of a grown woman, suddenly reduced to a child who needs rescuing. "He's doing this on purpose. Roman always does this. He has had it out for our family since the Meridian deal, and you know it. He's using this woman as—" "Stop talking," Graham Harrow said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Vivian closed her mouth. Graham turned to Roman. Something passed between them, the compressed history of men who know each other's leverage, who have sat across negotiating tables, who have categorized and cross-referenced each other's pressure points. "Roman," Graham said, "this is a private matter. Whatever you think you saw." "I didn't think," Roman said. "I watched. Both things are on the screen." Graham's jaw worked. The bracelet was a misunderstanding. Vivian may have set it down. She set it down in the flowers, 8 minutes, before accusing this woman of stealing it. "You can't establish intent from—" "I can establish placement and timing," Roman said. "Everyone in this room can. It's on the screen." Graham looked at the screen. He looked at the guests. He looked at the gala chairman Hartwell, who had appeared at the edge of the group, with the gray-faced expression of a man watching his event become a legal incident. "Mr. Hartwell," Graham said, pivoting smooth and fast, reflexive move of a man who has spent 40 years finding new angles when old ones collapse. "This has clearly gotten out of hand. I think the appropriate thing is for us to move forward with the program. Whatever disagreement has occurred tonight can be addressed privately. Mr. Harrow, Hartwell's voice was careful. He was picking his words like a man walking across ice, feeling for thickness with each step. I don't think that's given what's on the screen. I'm not sure we can simply... She should be removed. Graham pointed at Nia. His voice had the confidence of a man who has said similar things in similar rooms and had them executed without discussion. Whatever the circumstances, this woman has caused a disruption to the event. She didn't cause anything, Roman said. The temperature in the air between the two men changed. Nia felt it. She suspected everyone within 15 feet felt it. It was the particular temperature of a conversation moving past the social layer, past the theater of it, into something that was just two men and what they were actually willing to do. Stay out of this, Roman. Graham's voice had dropped. Not softer, denser. The voice of a threat dressed in reasonable volume. You've made your point. Whatever point you wanted to make, you've made it. But this is not your business. She was accused of a crime in my hotel. Your holding company's hotel. Same thing. Graham stepped slightly closer. Not aggressive, exactly 1 inch past comfortable. An old tactic, Nia thought. The small invasion of space that is designed to communicate something without providing anything anyone can quote later. You're getting involved in something that has consequences, Graham said. Quietly. Just for Roman. For your business relationships. For partnerships we've been developing together for 2 years. For things that are much larger than one evening. Roman looked at him. He let the silence run for a beat. I know, he said. Graham studied him. Something in the older man's face worked through several calculations. Then you understand the position you're putting yourself in. I understand the position you're in, Roman had said. And I think you should consider it carefully. Because what's on that screen isn't going away. And what happens next depends significantly on the choices made in the next 5 minutes. Graham Harrow had not become what he was by being easily rattled. But Nia watched something shift in his expression, the slow, grinding recognition of a man whose map has just been redrawn and who is still trying to read it with the old version. He turned back to Vivienne. Vivienne was standing with her arms wrapped around herself. For the first time all evening, she looked her age, maybe younger, not the Vivienne who had stalked across the ballroom with her cruelties in formation, but something smaller inside the expensive dress. Her friends had scattered. The redhead in silver was at the far edge of the room, on her phone, turned away. The others had found reasons to be elsewhere. The loyalty of that particular class, Nia thought, runs exactly as deep as the current risk level. Vivienne, Graham said, low and deliberate, where is the bracelet? It was not a question. Vivienne's mouth opened, closed. It's in the flowers, she said. And then faster, defensive, reaching for something. It was a joke. It was a stupid joke that went too far. I didn't think security would actually. A joke, Graham said. Flat, I was going to tell him. I was going to tell them before it got this far. You asked for a physical search, Roman said. Vivienne looked at him. After the bag search came up empty, you asked security to conduct a physical search of Ms. Bellamy. Roman's voice had not changed once in this entire conversation. Not louder, not softer, not colder or warmer. Just the same constant register. It was one of the more unnerving things Nia had ever witnessed. You were going to let that happen. In front of everyone in this room. To a woman you knew was innocent. Vivienne said nothing. Get the bracelet, Roman said. I'm not going to. Get it yourself, Roman said. From the flowers. Right now. In front of the room. Vivienne looked at her father. Graham Harrow was looking at the screen. At the footage still sitting there on the display, the timestamp visible, the image clear. He was doing the math. Nia could see him doing it, the calculation of a man who has spent a lifetime managing exposure, controlling narratives, deciding which fires to put out and which ones to let burn. He looked back at Vivienne. Do what he says, Graham said. Dad, Vivienne. One word. Final. The walk Vivienne Harrow made to that flower arrangement was 31 steps. Nia counted. She didn't know why she counted, maybe, because she needed something to hold on to in that moment, some small, concrete thing. because what she was feeling was enormous and shapeless, and she was still not going to cry. The room watched in complete silence. Vivienne reached into the arrangement. Her fingers found the bracelet. She pulled it free, a cascade of diamonds, catching the chandelier light with obscene brilliance, sparkling with exactly the kind of beauty that has no relationship whatsoever to the decency of the person wearing it. She straightened. She did not look at Nia. Nobody laughed. Nobody made a sound. The phones that had been raised were still raised. But they were recording something that was not what they had originally wanted to capture. Nia finally exhaled, one slow breath through her nose. The kind of breath you take when you've been holding something for so long that releasing it feels structural. And then Roman turned to her, just to her, blocking the room out with the simple fact of his attention, the way a person does when they want you to understand that what they're about to say is only for you. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, "and I need you to be prepared for what happens next. Because what I said to Graham Harrow about the next 5 minutes, that was accurate. But it's not complete." He looked at her steadily. "There's a reason Vivienne came after you, specifically tonight. And it has nothing to do with your dress." Nia looked at him. Her stomach tightened. "It has nothing to do with any of this," he said, gesturing almost imperceptibly at the space around them, the spectacle of the evening. The humiliation, the accusation, the public scene. He paused. All of that was designed to do one specific thing. To make sure that when you walked up to that stage tonight to accept that donation, nobody in this room was willing to listen to a word you said. Nia was very still. "What do I know?" she asked, even though she already had the beginning of an answer forming, cold and slow in the back of her mind. Roman looked at Graham Harrow across the room. Graham Harrow, who had just told his daughter to retrieve a bracelet from a flower arrangement and was now watching Roman and Nia with the particular expression of a man who is waiting for the last shoe, the one he's been dreading, the one whose sound he already knows. "Your organization," Roman said. "The work your team has been doing for the past 8 months. The families in the Linden Park buildings." He paused. "You know what you found?" She did. She had known for 8 months. She had the documents. She had the testimonies. She had the photographs of notices slipped under doors in the middle of the night, the rental agreements with clauses buried on page 11 in font designed not to be read, the records of building code complaints that had been filed and inexplicably dismissed. She had carried all of it in a locked drawer in her office, and on a hard drive she kept at her apartment, and in the memories of 17 families who had trusted her with stories that had cost them something to tell. She looked at Roman. "You know," she said, "it wasn't an accusation. It was a recognition." "I know," he said. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." He held her gaze. "Long enough to know that what's happening in that housing district is not a series of coincidences. And long enough to know that the man responsible for it has been in this building all evening, waiting to see whether you were going to be neutralized before you had the chance to speak." Nia's eyes moved to Graham Harrow. Graham Harrow, who was now speaking quietly into his phone, who had the focused, controlled expression of a man executing the next step of a plan, who had come into this gala with the expectation that a woman he'd never personally met would be humiliated, discredited, and removed long before she ever reached a microphone. The room around them was beginning to murmur again. The footage was still on the screens. The gala chairman was moving between clusters of guests, managing. The evening was trying to reassemble itself into something recognizable. But for Nia, standing in Roman Caldero's jacket, with the knowledge of what she knew, and the understanding of why it had made her a target, the room looked completely different than it had 20 minutes ago. She wasn't a woman who had accidentally wandered into someone else's crossfire. She had been placed in the crosshairs of something calculated and patient, and the only reason she was still standing in this ballroom, instead of being escorted out into D Street, was because a man she'd never met had been standing on a mezzanine at the right moment and had decided to pay attention. "What do you want?" she asked him. Directness for directness. Roman considered the question seriously. "Right now," he said, "I want Graham Harrow to understand that the evening has changed. that the calculation he walked in here with is no longer accurate. He looked across the room. After that, he paused. I think we should talk. When this is over. If you're willing. Nia looked at the man in front of her. She didn't trust him. She didn't know him. She was aware, in the clear-eyed way she was aware of most things, that Roman Caldero's motivations were not transparent, and possibly not simple. That powerful men who step into situations like this one generally have reasons that go beyond the obvious, and that she would be unwise to assume that his intervention tonight was purely about justice. But she also knew what she knew about the Linden Park buildings. She knew the name of the 73-year-old woman who had lived in her apartment for 31 years and received a notice last fall telling her she had 60 days. She knew the name of the single father who had missed 3 days of work, managing the fallout of a sudden rent increase designed to make him choose between legal action and stability. She knew the names of all 17 families because she had written them down and she had promised them something. She had not promised them anything she couldn't deliver. But she had promised them she wouldn't stop. She straightened. Roman's jacket shifted on her shoulders. She didn't take it off, not yet, not in this missroom, not in front of the people who had watched everything and chosen to watch instead of act. She would give it back when she was ready. That was her choice to make. After this is over, she said, we talk. Roman nodded. And across the ballroom, Graham Harrow finished his call and turned back to face them. And the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has just understood that the situation he walked into tonight and the situation he is currently standing in are not the same situation at all. The point of no return, Nia realized, was not the moment Roman had stepped down from the mezzanine. It wasn't the footage. It wasn't the bracelet retrieved in silence from the flowers. It wasn't even the look on Vivian's face as the room watched her walk those 31 steps. The point of no return was right now. This moment. Graham Harrow's eyes moving between Roman Caldero and a woman he had tried to erase before she could speak, and the understanding arriving in his face like weather that she was still standing, and she was still going to speak, and there was no longer any machinery in this room capable of stopping her. He had come here tonight to silence Nia Bellamy, and he had run out of ways to do it. Graham Harrow did not panic. That was the thing about men like Graham Harrow. They had spent so many decades in rooms where everything was at stake that panic had been burned out of them somewhere around their 40th year, replaced by something colder and more functional, a crisis metabolism that converted threat into action without the wasted seconds of emotional response. He had built a real estate empire on that metabolism. He had outlasted partners, investigations, market crashes, and 3 separate attempts by city council members to audit his development contracts. He did not panic now. He put his phone in his pocket and walked toward Roman Caldero with the measured stride of a man who has decided that the best available move is forward. Roman. He stopped at a distance that was close enough for conversation and far enough for dignity. I think we've both let this get further than it needed to go. You let it get exactly as far as you planned, Roman said. Graham's expression didn't change. I had no part in what Vivian did tonight. Whatever she didn't get here on her own, Graham. She's 34 years old. She makes her own choices. She made a choice to target a specific woman at a specific event on a specific night when that woman was speak to donors and city officials about evidence against your company. Roman looked at him steadily. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. Graham was quiet for a moment. One of those deliberate silences that powerful men use to signal that they are choosing their words carefully, that they could say more, that the restraint is voluntary. What is it you want, Roman? He asked. Because we can talk about what happened tonight, and we can talk about whatever else you think you know, but at the end of that conversation, both of us still have businesses to run. Both of us still have obligations to people who depend on us. He paused. Let's be adults about this. Nia, standing close enough to hear every word, felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear exactly. Something more like the recognition of a familiar pattern, the pattern of a powerful man trying to fold a situation back into private management before it could become public record. She had seen it in aldermen's offices, She had seen it in bank conference rooms. She had seen it across kitchen tables from landlords who arrived with lawyers and left with everything. She had been watching men try to make things disappear her entire career. Roman said, "The choice isn't mine to make." Graham's eyes moved to Nia. For the first time all evening, he looked at her directly. Really looked at her, not the contemptuous, peripheral awareness of a man who has decided someone is beneath consideration, but the sharp, calculating attention of an opponent being properly assessed. "Miss Bellamy," he said. His voice was measured, almost respectful. The respect of a predator acknowledging that the thing it underestimated has teeth. "I'm sure tonight has been deeply upsetting. I want you to know that what happened with Vivienne does not reflect." "Don't," Nia said. Graham paused. "Don't apologize for your daughter and then pivot to what you actually came over here to say," she said. "I've been in too many rooms where people do that. Say what you came to say." Something moved in Graham's face. Not offense. Something closer to reluctant respect. "All right," he said. "I came to tell you that whatever you think you have, whatever files or testimonies your organization has collected over the past several months, you should speak to a lawyer before you do anything with them. Not because I'm threatening you." He said the last sentence precisely, with the care of a man who knows exactly what the word threatening implies legally. "But because documentation gathered without proper legal framework can be challenged, can be ruled inadmissible, can expose the people who provided it to liability." He held her gaze. "I would hate to see families who trusted you get hurt because the process wasn't handled correctly." It was elegant. Nia had to give him that. It was exactly the kind of statement that sounded like advice and functioned as a warning and contained at its core a very specific threat wrapped in 6 layers of plausible deniability. "Thank you for your concern," she said. "I mean it genuinely." "I'm sure you do," she said. And she meant every syllable of it in the exact way he would hear it, and they both knew it, and neither of them needed to say so. Graham looked at Roman again, the look of a man closing a door. "Think carefully about your position," he said. "Both of you." He straightened his jacket, a gesture of composure, of returning to the surface, of a man who has decided this particular engagement is over even if the war isn't. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." He walked away, and Nia watched him go, and she felt the specific cold settling of a situation that has not resolved, that has simply submerged, gone under the surface, where it will continue to move in the dark. The gala tried to reconstitute itself. It was almost impressive, Nia thought, how quickly a room full of wealthy people could decide that something had not happened. The screens went back to the Foundation's programming. The chamber quartet in the corner resumed. Waitstaff materialized and began circulating again, and glasses were refilled, and the low current of conversation rebuilt itself. And within 20 minutes, the ballroom had the surface quality of an event that had experienced a minor turbulence and returned to cruising altitude. But the edges were different. The clusters of guests were different. People who had been laughing at Vivienne's comments 40 minutes ago were now having very quiet, very careful conversations with their partners. The gala chairman, Hartwell, had disappeared into a side room with 2 other Foundation board members. The security guard who had been ready to march Nia out the front doors had found reasons to be stationed on the other side of the ballroom. Vivienne was gone. Nia hadn't seen her leave. One moment she had been standing at the edge of the room, diminished and silent, and then she simply wasn't there anymore, with the particular invisibility of people who exit spaces before the full weight of what they've done can land on them. Roman had been stopped by a compact man in his 50s, silver-haired suit that cost serious money, the watchful eyes of someone in finance. They were talking in low voices near a column, and Roman's posture had shifted from the open stillness heats beside Nia to something slightly more closed. Business posture, the posture of a man who has stepped back inside his professional role. Nia found a chair at an empty table near the edge of the room. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the tablecloth. She looked at them. They were still shaking, very slightly. She had been holding them together or keeping them occupied the entire evening, and now that she had a moment of stillness, the tremor was visible, fine as a tuning fork's vibration, the delayed physical report of the last 90 minutes catching up with her body. She breathed through it. she thought about the families. She thought about the woman named Loretta Gates, who was 73 years old and had raised 3 children in her apartment on Linden Avenue, and who had sat across from Nia last October and shown her the notice, with shaking hands not unlike Nia's own right now. She thought about the envelope of documents in the locked drawer in her office. She thought about the hard drive at her apartment. She thought about the 8 months of work and the 17 testimonies, and what Graham Harrow's voice had sounded like when he'd said the word inadmissible. She needed to call her lawyer. Not tomorrow. Tonight. After this was over, she needed to call Marcus and make sure the office files were secured. She needed to... Ms. Bellamy. She looked up. A man she didn't recognize was standing at the edge of her table. Late 30s, light brown hair, the build of someone who had played sports in college and kept most of it. He was wearing a gala badge that identified him as a Foundation board member. His name on the badge said Christopher Vale. "I'm Chris Vale," he said, which was redundant and suggested nerves. "I'm on the Foundation board. I saw what happened tonight, and I wanted to come over and say..." He stopped. Started again. "I'm sorry. That should have been handled completely differently. The way Miss Harrow..." "Thank you," Nia said. It came out shorter than she intended. He looked like he had more prepared. She was too tired to hear it right now, the apology of someone who had been standing 20 feet away, holding a glass of something expensive while it happened, who had not moved, who wasn't decided in real time that it wasn't a situation to enter, and was now that the risk was resolved, coming over to establish that he was at his core a good person. She knew he probably was a good person. That was almost the worst part. "Can I get you anything?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said. "I actually need a few minutes, of course." He backed away with the careful retreat of a man who knows been dismissed. "If there's anything the Foundation can do, I'll find Mr. Hartwell," she said. "Thank you." He nodded and went. Nia put her hands back flat on the table. She looked at them until they stopped shaking. It took about 3 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd been worried, which meant that whatever social performance she'd been maintaining this evening about being fine was probably more transparent than she thought. "Nia, how's it going?" "I need you to go to the office tonight," she said. "Right now if you can." A pause. "What happened?" "I'll explain tomorrow. I need you to take the Linden Park files, everything in the locked drawer, the backup drive in the cabinet, all of it, and I need you to take it somewhere that isn't the office tonight." Another pause. Longer. Nia. His voice had changed. The slightly drowsy quality of a man who'd been watching television gone entirely, replaced by the sharp focus she relied on him for. "How serious is this?" She looked across the ballroom at Graham Harrow, who had rejoined a group of men near the bar and was laughing at something one of them had said with the easy sociability of a man at his own party. "Serious enough that I'm calling you from a gala at 11 o'clock, she said. "On my way," Marcus said, and hung up without ceremony, which was one of the many reasons she trusted him. She put her phone down, and that was when Patricia, the flustered gala coordinator, appeared at her elbow with a clipboard and a tight, professional smile that suggested significant strain behind it. "Ms. Bellamy," sicked it. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're going to be moving to the donation ceremony in about 15 minutes, and I wanted to confirm that you'll be..." "I'll be there," Nia said. Patricia's smile relaxed by several degrees. "Wonderful. If you want to take a few minutes first, there's a quiet room just off the main corridor that you're welcome to use." "I'm okay here," Nia said. "Thank you, Patricia." Patricia nodded and moved off. Nia sat for another moment. She smoothed the front of the green dress. She thought about the speech she had rewritten 4 times, the one folded in her clutch. She thought about the 17 families. She thought about what Graham Harrow had said about inadmissible evidence and proper legal framework, and she felt the anger that had been running as an undercurrent all evening sharpen into something cleaner and more useful than anger. Purpose. The specific focused purpose that comes when you understand exactly what you are fighting and why, and you have decided, beyond all available doubt, that you are not going to stop. She stood up. She found Roman at the edge of the room, finished with the silver-haired man, standing alone for the first time all evening. "I need to know what you know," she said without preamble. "All of it. Not the summary, not what you're comfortable sharing. What you actually know about Harrow Development and Linden Park." Roman looked at her. "Now?" he said. "You said the next 5 minutes mattered. The ceremony is in 15, so yes, now." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recalibration. The look of a man updating his assessment of something he had underestimated. "All right," he said. He walked her 2 steps further from the nearest cluster of guests, angling them both slightly away from the room with the practiced geometry of a man who has had a lifetime of conversations that couldn't be overheard. "Harrow Development has been acquiring blocks in the Linden Park and West Margrave districts for the past years," he said. "Low and direct. The acquisition strategy works in 2 phases. Phase 1 is property management. They purchase existing apartment buildings, usually through shell companies, without publicly associating the Harrow name. Phase 2 is pressure. Maintenance requests go unanswered. Building conditions deteriorate. Selective enforcement of minor lease violations begins. Rent increases arrive structured just below the threshold that would trigger tenant protection review." Nia was nodding. All of this she knew. "What you probably also know," Roman continued, "is that 17 families is not the complete picture. Your organization found 17. The actual number of affected households across both districts is closer to 90. Some of them left already. Some of them took the relocation offers. Some of them didn't know they had the right to refuse." Nia went very still. 90, she said. "Closer to 90. My investigators aren't finished." "How long have you had investigators on this?" 5 months. She did the math. Her organization had started collecting testimonies 8 months ago. Roman's investigation had begun 3 months later, independently. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "Because 3 of those buildings were sold to Harrow shell companies through a broker who had also brokered 2 Caldero commercial transactions in the previous year. My legal team flagged the shell company structure as potentially connected when they were doing due diligence on an unrelated deal." He paused. "I don't involve myself in residential displacement. I have commercial interests. It's a different business. But when I understood what the shell company trail connected to, I had it investigated." "For 5 months, Nia said. "For 5 months. And you didn't go to the authorities." Something moved through his expression. Complex. Not guilt exactly. "The documentation wasn't complete," he said, "and the channels through which this would need to move." He stopped. Started again differently. Some of those channels have relationships with the Harrow family that are older than some of the buildings in question." Nia understood what he was not saying. She'd been running into the edges of it. For 8 months, the complaint filed with the build authority that went nowhere. The alderman's office returned her calls 2 weeks with a form response. The sudden bureaucratic inaccessibility of records that should have been public. "You're saying it's been buried," she said. "I'm saying the ground is complicated." He looked at her. "Which is why tonight mattered. Not because of what happened with Vivienne. That was a tactic, ugly, but a tactic. What mattered is why it was deployed. You have 17 testimonies. You have documentation. And tonight you were going to speak to people with the specific combination of money and political access that could actually move this. Graham couldn't let that happen. Graham has been making sure things don't happen for 40 years, Roman said. He's very good at it." Nia looked across the room at Graham Harrow. And then her phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen. "Marcus," she answered it. "Did you get to the office?" The sound on the other end was wrong before Marcus said a single word. She could hear him breathing fast, uneven, the breathing of someone who has arrived somewhere and found something that reconfigured their entire understanding of the evening. "Nia," he said. "The office. What about it?" "Someone's been here." His voice was careful, in the way that people are careful when they're delivering information that they know is going to cause damage, and they're trying to control how much of it lands at once. The lock wasn't forced. Whoever it was had a key, or they're very good with locks. But the filing cabinet is open, the locked drawer. Nia's hand tightened on the phone. "Marcus, the files are gone, Nia." All the Linden Park files. The hard drive is gone. Everything in the locked drawer. The ballroom continued around her. The quartet played. Glasses clinked. The chandelier light was warm and gold and fell on everything equally, on the guilty and the innocent and the powerful and the ordinary, with the total indifference of expensive lighting. Nia stood absolutely still. Everything? She said. Everything I know of. I don't know what else they might have gone through. I haven't touched anything. I called you first. Don't touch anything, she said. Call the police. Stay outside the office until they come. Nia, the speech tonight, I know, she said. Without the documentation, if you go up there and make accusations. I know, Marcus. They'll come after you personally. They'll call it defamation. Without the physical evidence. Marcus, her voice was quiet. Absolute. Call the police. I'll call you back. She hung up. Roman was watching her face. The files are gone, she said. My office. Someone went in tonight while we were here and took everything. Every physical document, the backup drive. Roman's expression didn't change. That steadiness she'd been observing all evening. The thing that first struck her as coldness, and she was now understanding, was something else. Discipline. The control of a man who has trained himself not to react before he thinks it held. The speech, he said. I have my speech. I have a piece of paper with words on it. She laughed, short and without any warmth. I don't have a single piece of documentation to back up a word of it. Do you have copies anywhere else? I have the testimonies on a separate drive at my apartment. I didn't bring the physical files. I didn't think I'd need them here. I thought she stopped. I thought I was coming to accept a donation. I thought that's what this evening was. Roman was quiet for a moment. The digital drive at your apartment, he said. Is it secured? It's at my apartment, not my office. They shouldn't. She stopped again. Thought about it. Felt cold. They went through my office in the last 2 hours. Whoever they used knew the space. She thought about who had access to her office. Who knew the layout? Who had been there in the past 6 months? Marcus is the only one with a key besides me. And there's the super, but he doesn't. She stopped a third time. Something was assembling in the back of her mind. Cold and structural, like ice forming layer by layer. What is it? Roman asked. 3 weeks ago, she said slowly. We had a plumber, water damage in the ceiling of the back office. The building's super brought in a crew. They were in the office for 2 days. She looked at Roman. They would have seen the filing cabinet, the location of everything. Who arranged the crew? The super. Harrow owns the building. The sentence landed between them and sat there. Nia heard it a half second after she said it, the full weight of it, the architecture of it, the 4-year scope of a strategy that had not only targeted her evidence, but had targeted the physical space where she kept it, had gotten eyes inside her office, had waited with the patience of a man who had been dismantling things quietly for 40 years. She had been working inside a building that Graham Harrow owned for 3 years. Her organization had rented that office for 3 years. She felt sick, not the dramatic kind, the quiet, specific kind of sick that comes when you understand that something you thought was solid ground was actually arranged against you, and you're only now seeing the shape of the arrangement. The apartment drive, Roman said. Can someone get to it right now? Someone you trust absolutely. Nia's mind was already moving. My sister. Call her. She doesn't know. Call her right now, Roman said. Before the ceremony. Before Graham knows you've realized what happened. Nia pulled up Denise's number. Denise answered on the 4th ring, drowsy and confused, and Nia explained as fast and clearly as she could. The drive is in the top drawer of my desk. Put it in your bag. Go to your place. Don't tell anyone. And Denise, who had spent 30 years watching her sister fight things that would have broken other people, asked only one question. Are you okay? I'm standing up, Nia said. That's the best I can give you right now. Good enough, Denise said. On my way. Nia hung up. She looked at Roman. Even if Denise gets there in time, she said. The digital files are testimonies, recorded statements. What I had in the office were the physical corroborating documents, the notices, the lease agreements, the maintenance complaint records. The things that turned 17 stories into a documented pattern. She pressed her fingers to her temple for a moment. 1 moment. Then dropped her hand. Without those, The testimonies are 17 people saying something bad happened to them, which Graham's legal team will categorize as individual disputes. Anecdotal, unsubstantiated. I have documents, Roman said. She looked at him. 5 months of investigation, he said. My legal team has copies of shell company registrations, property transfer records, the broker connections. Some of the same maintenance complaint records, those are public filings. And tenant communications that were shared with my investigators directly by families who had given up on other channels. Nia stared at him. You have the corroborating documentation. Some of it, not all of it, but enough. Why did she stop herself? Took a breath. Why are you telling me this now? Because now is when you need it. You've had it for 5 months, and I've been determining how to use it in a way that doesn't get buried through the same channels that buried everything else. He looked at her steadily. I'm not the right messenger for this, Nia. My name on this documentation, my investigators, my legal team, the first thing Graham's lawyers do is make it about Caldero versus Harrow. A business dispute. A mob boss targeting a legitimate developer. He said the phrase without embarrassment or deflection. It becomes a different story entirely, and the families get lost in the middle of it. Nia understood. She understood it completely, and the understanding was infuriating because he was right. But you standing at that stage tonight, he continued, with your organization's work, with 17 testimonies, and with documentation from an independent investigation that covers every element that's a different conversation. That's not Caldero versus Harrow. That's evidence. My physical documents are gone, yes, he said, but mine aren't. She looked at him. The gala chairman, Hartwell, had reappeared from the side room. He was checking his watch and looking toward the stage and then toward Nia with the expression of a man trying to determine whether the evening was about to become significantly more complicated than it already had been. 12 minutes to the ceremony. 12 minutes for Nia to decide whether to walk onto a stage with a speech she'd written for a different version of this evening, accept a check, say something careful and appropriate, and go home to deal with the stolen files and the compromised office, and the 90 families who were not the 17 she'd known about, and the machinery of a 40-year empire that had just demonstrated it knew exactly where she worked. Or she looked at Roman. Your documentation, she said. Is it here, on you? My attorney has copies in a secure system I can access. How fast? I can have a complete set transmitted to your phone in under 10 minutes. I have 12, she said. He already had his own phone out. Then let's use 10, he said. Somethings, quietly, and somewhere across the ballroom, Graham Harrow set down his drink and turned from the group he'd been performing ease for, and his eyes found Nia Bellamy standing at the edge of the room with Roman Caldero, both of them looking at their phones. And his face changed in a way that none of the men around him noticed, but that Nia, glancing up at precisely that moment, caught with perfect clarity. He knew. He didn't know exactly what they had, or how they had it, or what was coming in the next 12 minutes. But he knew that the woman he had come here tonight to silence was still standing. And she was not empty-handed, and there was not a single thing left in his arsenal that he hadn't already used. Graham Harrow, for the first time in a very long time, had run out of moves, and the stage lights at the front of the ballroom were beginning to come up. The files came through in 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Nia knew because she was watching the clock on her phone with the specific focus of someone who has nothing else they can usefully do in the moments before a thing happens. Roman's attorney, a woman named Solis, according to the sender name on the secure transfer, had compressed everything into a structured digital packet: shell company registrations, property transfer chains, broker correspondence, building complaint records pulled from public filings, and 11 additional tenant communications that Nia had never seen before. Families she didn't know, names she hadn't written down, stories that had been reaching for something to hold on to and had found Roman Caldero's investigators instead of her office. She scrolled through it fast, not reading trudging, looking for the architecture of it, the shape of the evidence, whether it was the kind of documentation that could survive a room full of people who wanted to disbelieve it. It was. It was thorough in the way that only 5 months of professional investigation with serious legal backing produces. Not the careful, scrappy, late-night documentation of a nonprofit with 2 full-time staff members and a shared printer. This was the work of people who knew exactly what would be needed and had built accordingly. Her throat was tight, not from fear this time. "It's enough," she said. Roman was watching her face, not the phone. "You're sure?" "It's enough to start a fire that can't be put out in this room tonight." She looked up at him. "Whether it survives what comes after, that depends on things neither of us controls." "That's always true, I know." She looked toward the stage. The lights were fully up now. Hartwell had positioned himself near the podium, with the expression of a man waiting for a train that might be arriving on fire. "I need 2 minutes to adjust the speech. You have 3. She moved to the nearest empty table and sat down and pulled her speech from her clutch and unfolded it. 4 pages, double-spaced, the version she'd written for an audience of donors who needed to be charmed into caring about people whose lives they didn't see. She read the first page in 30 seconds and understood completely that it was not the speech for this room, for this night, for the specific and irreversible situation that had assembled itself around her in the past 2 hours. She turned it over. She wrote on the back, no full sentences, fragments, sequences, the bones of what she needed to say. Her handwriting was fast and slightly uneven, the handwriting of someone moving faster than fine motor control wants to go. She wrote 7 lines. She crossed out 2. She wrote them differently. She looked at what remained and decided it was the truth, and the truth was the only thing that had ever actually worked for her. She folded the paper and stood up. Roman was 3 feet away, watching the room with the peripheral attention of a man who tracks multiple things simultaneously without appearing to track anything. "Graham is moving," he said quietly. Nia didn't look. Toward the stage, toward Hartwell. She started walking. She covered the distance between her table and the stage approach in the time it took Graham Harrow to reach Hartwell and put one hand on the chairman's shoulder in the particular way of a man delivering an urgent private message with the body language of a friendly aside. Hartwell looked up. He saw Nia coming. He saw Graham's hand on his shoulder. She watched the chairman perform the calculation, in real time the rapid, visible, almost sympathetic arithmetic of a man trying to determine whose room this was and whose problem he could least afford to inherit. She didn't slow down. She reached them at the same moment. Graham finished speaking. Hartwell's expression had the gray, careful quality of a man who has just been told something that has made his evening structurally more complicated and is now facing the source of that complication, walking toward him with the focused energy of someone who has already decided what happens next. "Miss Bellamy," Hartwell said, "I was just coming to find you. I wanted to speak with you before—" "I'm ready," she said. "Whenever you need me up there." Of course, of course." His eyes moved briefly to Graham and back. "I wanted to make sure you were comfortable. Given everything that's happened this evening, if you'd prefer to defer the ceremony to a future event." "I wouldn't prefer that," she said. "The Foundation would completely understand if you needed." "Mr. Hartwell." She stopped. She looked at him directly. Not unkindly, she had no anger for Hartwell specifically, who was a decent enough man caught between pressures he hadn't created. "I came here tonight because the families my organization serves need this funding. What happened before doesn't change that. It doesn't change why I'm here or what I'm going to say." She paused. "Unless there's a specific reason you're asking me not to speak." Hartwell's jaw moved. Graham said Edward, his voice was easy, congenial. The voice of a man who has been having conversations like this for so long that he can make a threat sound like a favor without any visible effort. "The circumstances tonight have been unusual. It might be cleaner for everyone involved, for the Foundation, for Miss Bellamy's organization to table this and schedule a proper." "The ceremony is on the program," Nia said. She looked at Hartwell, not Graham. "My name is on the program. The donation is on the program. The guests came tonight expecting this to happen." She let that sit for one beat. If there's a reason it isn't going to happen, that reason should be stated clearly. Hartwell looked at Graham. Graham's hand was no longer on Hartwell's shoulder. He had it in his pocket, the shift of a man moving from pressure to something with more space in it, recalibrating for a different approach. There's no reason, Hartwell said. He said it quietly, like something settling. The ceremony proceeds. He looked at Graham with the careful exhaustion of a man who has that this particular problem is above his pay grade, and he is going to do the obvious correct thing and let the consequences land where they land. If you'll excuse me. He moved toward the stage. Graham watched him go. Then he looked at Nia, and his face had changed again. Not to fear, Graham Harrow was not going to give her fear. But the calculation was gone. The management was gone. What was underneath was older and less polished than any version of him she'd seen tonight. Raw and certain, and completely without pretense. You have no idea what you're doing, he said. Quietly. Just for her. I have a very specific idea, she said. Whatever Roman gave you, whatever you think you have, you're about to use it in a public forum without legal counsel present and without understanding the liability you're taking on personally. His voice was steady, patient, like a man explaining something to someone who is about to make an expensive mistake. The families you're trying to protect will be better served by a proper legal process, with representation, with time. The families I'm trying to protect have been waiting for a proper legal process for 4 years, she said. Some of them are already gone. That is a natural consequence of. Don't. The word came out sharper than she planned. She pulled it back, not the word but the heat of it, returned to the level register she'd been maintaining. Don't tell me about natural consequences. You know what happened to those families. You engineered what happened to those families. And you sent your daughter here tonight to make sure I couldn't say so. Graham was quiet. I'm going to say so, Nia said. She walked past him toward the stage. The walk from the edge of the ballroom to the stage steps was approximately 40 feet, and she was aware of every inch of it. She was aware of the carpet under her shoes, the slight give of it, the expensive silence it absorbed. She was aware of Roman, somewhere behind her to her left, and she was aware of not looking for him, because she had to do this the same way she had done every hard thing in her professional life, not borrowing other people's steadiness. Not leaning on what anyone else had built, but standing in her own strength, which was not nothing, which had never been nothing, and which had been tested enough times that she knew precisely where it lived in her body and how to get to it fast. She was aware of the room beginning to quiet as she approached. The particular attention that gathers when something is about to happen, and the room doesn't know yet what kind of thing it is. She was aware of her hands, not shaking anymore. Hartwell met her at the stage steps and walked her up with the careful attention of a man doing penance through courtesy. He said something to her that she heard but didn't absorb. She nodded appropriately. She stood at the side of the stage while he approached the podium and adjusted the microphone and began speaking in the smooth, practiced cadences of a man who has opened 100 of these ceremonies. She unfolded her speech. She looked at the 7 lines on the back. She looked at the original 4 pages in the front. She put the original 4 pages in her clutch. She held the 7 lines. Hartwell was wrapping up. She heard her name, the Southside Community Housing Initiative. A smattering of applause from the audience, the polite variable kind, some people giving more than others, the people who hadn't been watching giving the most freely. She walked to the podium. The room was fuller than she'd registered from the floor. From here she could see all of it, the tables, the faces, the phones that were here and there visible, the clusters and the stragglers, the people who were watching with genuine attention, and the people who were watching with the careful half-attention of guests at an event, waiting for the part that matters to them. She could see Vivienne's empty seat. She could see Graham Harrow standing at the back of the room. Not sitting, standing. With 2 other men she didn't recognize who had the particular posture of people who have been given a task and are waiting to execute it. She could see Roman closer to the front than she'd expected, positioned with the thoughtful unobtrusiveness of a man who knows exactly where he needs to be without drawing attention to the knowledge. She adjusted the microphone. She looked at the room. My name is Nia Bellamy, she said. I'm the director of the Southside Community Housing Initiative. We work with families in Chicago's South and West neighborhoods who are navigating housing crises, eviction, displacement, unsafe conditions, predatory lease practices. This year, we helped 412 families. We have a staff of 4, a budget that would make most of this room's catering bills look extravagant, and an office that I now know I probably need to move. A small, uncertain current of laughter moved through the audience. She hadn't planned that last line. It came out anyway. She left it. I was going to stand up here and talk about our work in general terms, she said. Our outcomes, our community partnerships, our funding needs. I prepared a speech that would have made you feel good about supporting us without making you uncomfortable about anything specific. She paused. I'm not going to give that speech. The uncertain current stilled. Tonight, I was accused of stealing a piece of jewelry that was deliberately planted by the woman who accused me. I was searched in front of this room. I was told to leave. Some of you watched that happen. Some of you had your phones out. She didn't say it with heat. She said it with the matter-of-fact steadiness of a witness giving testimony. I'm not saying that to embarrass anyone. I'm saying it because what happened to me tonight in this ballroom for 20 minutes is a version of what has been happening to 90 families in the Linden Park and West Margrave neighborhoods for 4 years. The mechanics are different. The stakes are higher. But the structure is the same. Find a target, manufacture a reason they don't belong, and move them out before they can say anything that costs you something. The room had the quality of held breath. Nia looked at the 7 lines in her hand. Harrow Development, she said, has been systematically acquiring residential buildings in those districts through shell companies. Once acquired, the strategy is simple: deteriorate conditions, manufacture lease violations, and structure rent increases to push residents out without triggering tenant protection review. The families don't disappear from a spreadsheet. They just move to a different one: shelters, relatives' couches, buildings further from their jobs and schools and the communities they built their lives in. She looked up from the paper. I have documentation. My organization has 17 direct testimonies. An independent investigation has verified shell company registration chains, property transfer records, and direct tenant communications that corroborate the pattern across 90 households. Graham was moving. She saw it from the stage, the specific, purposeful movement of a man who has decided that management has failed, and intervention is the only remaining tool. He was coming through the tables toward the front of the room, with the 2 men she didn't recognize flanking him at a distance that was too deliberate to be coincidental. She kept talking. The evidence my organization collected was taken tonight from our office while I was here. Someone entered the building, accessed my files, and removed the physical documentation. She paused. 1 beat. The independent investigation's documentation was not in my office. She held up her phone. It was transmitted to this phone 9 minutes before I walked onto this stage. Graham stopped. He was 12 feet from the stage, and he stopped. Not because anyone stopped him physically, because he understood, arriving at the bottom of those stage steps, in front of 200 people, that the thing he had come here to prevent had already happened, was actively happening, was on the phone in her hand and on the screen of her voice in the room's memory and in the notes and the photos and the video recordings of the people sitting at those tables with their attention fully, completely, irreversibly on her face. He stopped. Nia looked at him from the stage, 12 feet between them, and she could see his jaw. She could see the tendons in his neck. She could see the precise moment when a man who has spent 40 years controlling rooms understood that he had lost this one. Mr. Harrow, she said into the microphone. The room went electric. She hadn't planned to say his name from the stage. It came from somewhere below planning, from the same place the unscripted line about the office had come from the part of her that was done being managed and done being careful about who she made uncomfortable. The families in those buildings know your company's name, she said. They know it from notices slipped under their doors. They know it from lease agreements with clauses on page 11, written in font you need a magnifying glass to read. They know it from maintenance requests that went unanswered for 8 months while their ceilings leaked and their heat went out. She held his gaze from the stage. They didn't get to face you across a ballroom. They got envelopes. So I'm going to say what they'd say if they were standing where I'm standing. The 2 men who had been flanking Graham had stopped behind him. One of them was on his phone. The other was looking at the room, with the rapid assessment of someone calculating whether there's anything useful left to do. There wasn't. What you did is being documented, Nia said. What's been done to those families is a matter of record. The documentation is in the hands of people who cannot be pressured or removed from this building tonight. She looked away from Graham and back to the room. And the reason I'm standing here instead of being escorted out the door 2 hours ago is standing somewhere in this room and deserves acknowledgement. She didn't look at Roman. She didn't need to. Help is not weakness, she said. Accepting it is not the same as needing to be saved. I spent the first 2 hours of this evening refusing to let this room take something from me that was mine. And then I spent the last 20 minutes accepting the resources of someone who recognized that the fight was real and offered what he had. She folded the paper, pocketed it. That distinction matters to me. It might matter to some of you. The room was absolutely silent. And then several things happened in rapid and overlapping succession, and Nia would spend the following weeks sorting them into sequence, because in the moment they arrived all at once with the density of things that have been building pressure for a long time and have finally found a direction to move. Graham Harrow said something to the man on his phone and turned and walked toward the exit, and the quality of his walk was the walk of a man in retreat. Not defeated men, like Graham Harrow, did not experience public defeat as a primary emotion. They converted it to strategy before it could become feeling but moving, which was not the same as winning, which was not the same as being able to finish what he'd started tonight. The room broke open. Not chaos, something more complicated than chaos. Voices, movement, the specific social combustion of 200 people, all deciding simultaneously how to respond to something they hadn't expected to witness, hadn't come here to witness, and were now going to have to find a position on. Several people were on their phones. Several were talking to their neighbors with the animated energy of people, processing something in real time. A woman at one of the front tables had her hand pressed to her mouth and was staring at the stage with an expression that Nia recognized as the specific shock of someone who has just learned something they can't unknow. Hartwell appeared at the edge of the stage, looking like a man who has aged several years in the past 15 minutes. And then the man from the front tables, the silver-haired man in finance, who had been talking to Roman earlier, stood up. He was in his 50s, the bearing of someone who has sat in boardrooms and commanded rooms the way some people command the weather. He stood up and looked at the stage and said nothing for a moment. And then he said, at a volume that not quite a speech, but more than a murmur, "Where do we send the documentation? The tenants' testimonies. Where should people contact you?" Nia looked at him. Her breath caught, just for a second. 1/2 second of something catching in her chest before she could stop it. "The Southside Community Housing Initiative website," she said. "Or you can contact us directly. Our information is in the program." He nodded and sat down. Someone else stood up. A woman in her 40s with a lawyer's precise posture and the kind of contained expression that suggests someone keeping strong feeling under very firm management. "Are you pursuing this through the City Building Authority or directly through?" "Both," Nia said, "and we're open to additional legal support." The woman nodded and didn't sit down yet. She looked around the room with a specific, deliberate quality, the look of someone doing a private count, calculating something about the audience, and arriving at a number she found adequate. "I'm Catherine Reeves," she said, to the room, not just Nia. "Environmental and housing litigation, Reeves and Marsh. Ms. Bellamy, my office will contact you Monday." Nia gripped the podium, not in distress, in the very specific physical way that people grip things when they need something to be real, when the solidity of an object under their hands is confirmation that what is happening is actually happening. "Thank you," she said. Her voice stayed even. She was proud of how even it stayed. And across the ballroom, in the churning movement of a room converting shock to response, Nia saw Roman Caldero standing very still amid all of it, watching her the way he'd watched her from the mezzanine, with the full, undivided, unglamorous attention of a man who finds something genuinely remarkable and has the self-possession not to look away from it. She held his gaze for 1 second. Then she looked back at the room, because the room was where the work was, where the families needed her to be, where the next 10 seconds and the next 10 minutes, and the next 10 months all had to come from. And from somewhere near the back, a woman's voice, older, unhurried, carrying the authority of someone who has been in enough rooms to know when one has changed, said, "Let the girl speak." The murmuring subsided. Nia Bellamy straightened. The podium was solid under her hands. The room was waiting. She opened her mouth, and she spoke not from the 7 lines in her pocket, not from the careful 4 pages she had prepared for a different version of this night, but from the 3 years she had sat at kitchen on tables, and from some send keeps and said promise she intended to keep, and the 8 months she had spent building something that was supposed to matter, and the 90 families whose names she didn't yet all know, but was going to learn. Every single one. And the 17 she already knew by heart, whose stories had been taken from a filing cabinet tonight by a man who had spent 40 years making sure certain people stayed quiet. She spoke, and the room listened, and at the back of the ballroom, beyond the tables, beyond the guests who had turned their chairs, and the ones standing at the edges, and the waitstaff who had stopped moving because the room had called for stillness, without anyone asking at the back, where the corridor light cut a dim rectangle across the carpet, Graham Harrow paused in the exit. He turned. He looked at the stage. He looked at Nia Bellamy, standing in green, jacket given back now, in her own dress, her own body, her own voice, filling the most expensive room in Chicago. He looked for 3 seconds. Then he walked out, and the door closed behind him. And nobody in the room watched him go, because there was nothing left in that direction worth watching. Everything that mattered was right here. In this voice, in this room, in this woman who had arrived 2 hours ago holding a champagne glass and a carefully revised speech and the quiet, immovable knowledge of her own worth, and was now standing at a podium with no glass, no careful speech, nothing but the truth and the stamina to deliver it to every person in the room who was willing to hear it. The lights above the stage were warm. The room held. And Nia Bellamy, who had been told in 17 different ways tonight that she did not belong here, was still standing, still speaking, still herself, exactly herself, not smaller, not louder, not performing anything, not surviving anything. Just present. Just this. And the next hour would determine whether it was enough to burn the Harrow machine to the ground, or whether Graham Harrow would walk out of this building tonight and begin dismantling everything she had. Just built with the methodical patience of a man who, she spoke for 19 minutes. She knew the exact duration because Hartwell's assistant, a young man named Derek, who would later tell her it was the most useful thing he'd done all year, was timing the segment from the side of the stage with a small digital stopwatch. And when she finally stepped back from the podium, he held it up for her to see. 19 minutes, 43 seconds. It felt like 6. It felt like 2 hours. It felt like both things simultaneously, the way time moves when you are fully inside something that matters. She covered everything, not in the smooth, managed way of her original speech, with its careful architecture of statistics and outcomes and donor-friendly language. This was different. This was the raw version, the version she had been assembling in the back of her mind for 8 months, without letting herself fully articulate it, because the fully articulated version had teeth, and she had not yet been in a room where that felt safe. She talked about Loretta Gates, the 73-year-old woman on Linden Avenue who had raised 3 children in her apartment and received a 60-day notice last fall. She didn't use Loretta's name without permission. She had Loretta's permission, had asked for it on a Tuesday afternoon in October when Loretta pressed her hand across a kitchen table and said, "Use it, baby, use everything. Because I've been quiet long enough, and quiet didn't save me anything." She talked about the maintenance complaint records that showed 47 filed complaints across 6 buildings in 18 months, cross-referenced against building authority responses that ranged from delayed to non-existent. She talked about the shell company chain River North Holdings, Meridian Property Solutions, Lakeview Capital Partners, 3 names that trace back to a single registered agent in a suburban office park 12 miles from Graham Harrow's main downtown headquarters. She talked about 90 families. She said the number twice. Not for effect, because she needed the room to feel the weight of it. the specific mass of 90 households, the number of kitchen tables and children's bedrooms and front stoops that number represented, the accumulated ordinary human life of it. By the 12th minute, 3 people at the front tables were openly recording on their phones, not for social media documentation, but with the specific focused quality of people creating a record they intend to keep. By the 15th minute, Catherine Reeves, the housing attorney who had stood up earlier, had moved to a seat closer to the stage and was taking notes in a small leather notebook with the rapid, abbreviated script of someone who does not want to miss details. By the 19th minute, the room had divided itself along a fault line that had not existed 2 hours ago, and the fault line was not between wealthy and working class, or powerful and ordinary, or old money and new. It was between the people who were going to do something about what they had heard and the people who were going to go home and decide tomorrow how they felt about it. And both groups, Nia could see from the stage, were real. Both were honest. That was fine. She had never believed that one speech changed everything. She had always believed that one speech could change enough people, enough momentum, enough of a shift in the air, that the thing that had been immovable begins to perceive itself as movable. And that perception is the beginning of everything. She stepped back from the podium. Hartwell was beside her in 3 steps, and whatever he had been expecting from the evening, whatever version of this ceremony he had managed in his head when he'd woken up this morning, his expression was the expression of a man who has been thoroughly rearranged by the last half hour and is still sorting through the rearrangement. He put out his hand. She shook it. "The foundation," he said, and then stopped. Started again. "The foundation's donation stands." "Obviously," he said, obviously with the emphasis of a man covering a moment when he had briefly considered whether it might not stand and has decided that particular thought should not be available for examination. "And I want, on behalf of the board, I need to say that what happened here tonight, the way you were treated for the ceremony—" "You don't need to," she said. "I think I do." "Then do it later," she said. "Not unkindly. Right now I need to get off this stage and make several phone calls." He nodded rapidly and moved aside. She walked off the stage. The first phone call was Marcus. He had followed her instructions and called the police to the office and was standing outside on the sidewalk when she reached him, his voice tight with the residual adrenaline of a man who had arrived at his workplace to find it violated and then spent an hour waiting in the November cold for a police report he wasn't sure would lead anywhere. "They took photographs," he said. "The officers. They filed the report. They said," and this is a direct quote, "Nia, they said these things are hard to prove." "I know," she said. "You know. The report matters even if they don't pursue it," she said. "It's a timestamp. It establishes that the documents were taken and when. That matters for what comes next." "What comes next?" "Catherine Reeves," she said. "Housing litigation attorney. She'll contact us Monday. Marcus, I need you to write down everything you saw when you arrived at the office tonight. Every detail. Do it tonight while it's fresh." "Already started," he said. She let out a breath. "Thank you." "Is it done?" he asked. "The ceremony. Did you—" "I spoke," she said, a pause. And I'll know what it meant in about 6 weeks, she said honestly. "But I spoke." He was quiet for a moment on the other end. She could hear the traffic near the office, a bus passing, the ordinary sound of the city moving through its night, completely indifferent to what had happened in a hotel ballroom in the last 2 hours. "Go home, Marcus," she said. "Get some sleep. You too," he said. She almost laughed. "Maybe," she said, and hung up. The second call was Denise. Her sister answered before the first ring finished, which meant she had been sitting with her phone in her hand, and Nia felt the warmth of that, the specific, unearned, completely reliable warmth of a person who waits for you. "I have it," Denise said immediately. "The drive. I'm at my place. I made copies to my laptop as soon as I got here, like you would have told me to if you'd had time to think of it." Nia stopped walking. She was in the corridor off the main ballroom, away from the noise and the movement, under the cooler, more functional light of a hotel service hallway. "You made copies," she said. 3. 2 on the laptop and 1 uploaded to my cloud account. I don't know what's on it. I didn't open anything. That's not my business. But I figured if it was worth you calling me at 11 at night, it was worth copying. Nia pressed her back against the wall of the corridor. She was very tired. Not the angry, burning tired that had been fueling her for the past 2 hours, but the deeper kind, the structural fatigue that sets in after the adrenaline processes out, when the body begins its honest accounting of what it has spent. "Denise," she said. "Yeah, I'm okay." A beat of silence that contained about 30 years of sisterhood. "I know you're okay," Denise said. "You're always okay." "That's not actually what I'm asking." Nia closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. The corridor was cool and quiet, and the light behind her eyelids was orange-red from the ambient glow. "It was a bad night," she said. "And then it got better. And then it got worse again. And then I stood in front of about 200 people and said everything I've been carrying for 8 months. "Good," Denise said. "Yeah," Nia said. "Was there someone?" Denise asked. The careful sister question, the one layered over with casual phrasing to give you room to take it or leave it. When it was bad. Was there someone there? Nia thought about a jacket placed around her shoulders. About a man asking, "Are you hurt?" and meaning it simply, without agenda. "Yeah," she said. "There was someone." "Okay," Denise said. "Just that. I'll come by tomorrow," Nia said, "to get the drive. And I'll explain everything. Bring coffee," Denise said. "The real kind, not that stuff from your office." "Done," Nia said. She hung up. She stood in the corridor for another 30 seconds. Just standing. Just breathing. The party sounds from the ballroom were muffled here. Music, conversation, the clinking of things, the ordinary noise of people continuing their evening. She thought about the Loretta Gateses of the world, continuing their evenings too, wherever they were tonight, most of them not knowing that anything had happened in a hotel ballroom on the other side of the city with their names in it. She would have to call each of them, all 17. Probably starting Monday. She would need to tell them that the physical documents were gone, but the digital copies survived, and an attorney was involved. She would need to tell them about the 90, because some of them didn't know there were 89 others in the same situation. And knowing sometimes matters. Sometimes the simple geography of not being alone in a thing changes something fundamental about how you carry it. She pushed off the wall and walked back toward the ballroom. Roman was waiting in the corridor, not on her path exactly, but close enough that it was clearly intentional. He was leaning against the wall with the casual economy of someone who is comfortable standing still for long periods, a thing he apparently was. "Your phone's been going off," he said. She checked it. 6 missed calls and a cascade of text notifications. 3 journalists. She didn't know how they'd gotten her number, but journalists always found numbers. It was their particular form of witchcraft. 2 foundation board members, and 1 call from an unlisted number with no voicemail. She put the phone in her clutch. "Reeves is at one of the tables requesting your direct contact," Romans said. "Her associate is with her. I'll go find her in a minute." There are also 3 aldermen in the building who apparently had a very productive conversation over the last 15 minutes, he said. "One of them is from the West Margrave district." Nia looked at him. "Which one?" "Alderman Reyes." Sandra Reyes. Nia knew the name. She had called Sandra Reyes's office 4 times in 8 months. She had received form responses each time. She thought of those form responses now and felt a complicated, not entirely warm set of emotions about the alderman's sudden availability. "Convenient," she said. Roman almost smiled. "Politicians follow weight shifts." "I know they do," she said. "That doesn't make them useful." "It makes them available," he said, which is different. Availability can be useful. She looked at him. This man who had placed his jacket around her shoulders 3 hours ago and set in motion or perhaps accelerated. She still didn't know exactly which a chain of events that had resulted in her standing in a hotel corridor with documentation. An attorney, 3 aldermen, and no physical filing cabinet worth of evidence, but a digital copy safe on her sister's laptop. "I need to ask you something," she said. "All right." "What do you want from this?" she said. "Not tonight. Not the building stuff or the Harrow situation. From this," she gestured slightly, "at the space between them. What do you actually want?" He considered the question. She had noticed that he always did. He never answered before he was ready, which was rarer than it should have been in her experience of people. I want to know if the work is real, he said. Your work. What your organization actually does. It's real, she said. I know it's real, he said. I've known it was real for 5 months. What I want to know is whether the person behind it is what the work suggests she is. She held his gaze. And I think she is, he said. But that's an observation, not an answer to your question. He paused. What I want is a conversation. Not tonight, tonight's been enough of everything. But a real conversation, when you've had time to sleep and eat and think. About what your organization needs that it doesn't have. About what I have that might be useful. About how those two things could work without you owing me anything, or me having any claim on anything you've built. People who offer things without conditions usually have conditions, she said. Usually, he agreed. I have one. She waited. I want the work to succeed, he said. Whatever structure we agree on, whatever I provide funding, legal resources, building space, I want those families to be better off at the end of it than they were before. That's the condition. Not my name anywhere. Not my presence in anything public. Not your endorsement or your credibility transferred to my purposes. He looked at her directly. Just the outcome. Nia was quiet for a moment. She had spent 3 years building something without anyone's help, who didn't have strings attached to the help. She had spent 3 years being grateful for grants that came with reporting requirements and donor visits, and the implicit understanding that your work needed to be legible and palatable to people who would not have to live with the consequences of inadequate housing, but who needed to feel good about funding the people who dealt with it. She was very tired of conditions dressed as generosity. She was less certain about what this was, which was, she thought, at least honest. I'll have the conversation, she said, after I sleep. Fair, he said. She started toward the ballroom. Nia. She stopped, turned. He was still leaning against the wall, hands loose at his sides. In the corridor light, he looked like what he probably actually was, a man in his late 30s, who had done difficult things for a long time and had developed around himself the kind of quietness that comes not from peace, but from the sustained management of a complicated interior life. You didn't need me to finish it, he said. What happened on that stage? That was yours. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. She went back into the ballroom. The next 3 hours were not triumphant in any clean way. They were the textured, complicated, frequently exhausting work of following through on a night that had created openings without guaranteeing what walked through them. Nia talked to Catherine Reeves for 40 minutes at a corner table, going through the documentation on her phone, answering questions with the specificity that the attorney clearly preferred over general statements. Watching Reeves build the architecture of a legal strategy in real time, with the focused efficiency of a person who moves fast once she decides something is worth moving for. The shell company chain is the strongest thread, Reeves said. If we can establish the beneficial ownership back to Harrow Sr., and this documentation gets us most of the way, there we have the foundation for a coordinated harassment claim. Potentially a civil RICO argument if the pattern across multiple properties holds. It holds, Nia said. I'll need your 17 testimonies. And I'll want the families represented individually, not collectively. That gives us more procedural options. I'll need to talk to them first, Nia said. They've been through enough. I'm not going to give you their names and let them find out through a legal filing. Reeves looked at her. A brief assessment, then a nod. Monday. Call the office and ask for Jamie. She'll set up a preliminary consultation. Nia wrote down the name. She wrote it in the margin of her speech paper, the only paper she had. It sat beside the 7 lines she'd used, at the podium, the bones of the 19 minutes that had changed the temperature of this room. She talked to Alderman Sandra Reyes next, which was the more complicated conversation. Reyes was a compact woman in her mid-50s, with the kind of face that is simultaneously open and unrevealing, a politician's face, one that listens without committing, and expresses concern without promising its direction. She said the right things. She said she had been hearing concerns about the Linden Park situation for some time. She said she wanted to ensure her office was doing everything within its authority to protect residents. She said she looked forward to reviewing the documentation. Nia said she looked forward to sending it. They shook hands. Reyes moved on to talk to someone else, and Nia watched her go with the clear-eyed assessment of someone who has been through enough political conversations to know that this one had been productive in proportion to the available audience and would require significant follow-up pressure to maintain its momentum when the audience was gone. She wrote Santarez's office number in the margin of the speech paper. The silver-haired finance man, his name was Arthur Pellman. She learned, a fund manager with a 20-year history of impact investment, had a brief but specific conversation with her that ended with him saying he would have his foundation director contact her about a multi-year unrestricted grant. Not restricted to specific program deliverables. Unrestricted. The word landed in Nia's chest, like something she hadn't known she was hungry for until it was offered. She wrote his name down. By the time the ballroom had thinned to its last quarter, it was past midnight, and Nia Bellamy's feet hurt, and her voice was the kind of raw that comes from speaking intensely for an extended period. And she had names and numbers in the margin of her speech paper, and a phone full of messages she hadn't answered, and a head full of things she needed to do and had not yet done, and she was more tired than she could remember being in recent memory. She was also, underneath the exhaustion, running on something. Not adrenaline anymore that had metabolized at his hours ago. Something slower and more sustainable. Something that felt, if she was being honest with herself in the clear-headed privacy of her own mind, like the particular quality of rightness that comes when you have done the exact thing you were supposed to do at the exact moment you were supposed to do it, regardless of what it cost. That feeling did not solve anything. It did not retrieve the stolen files or guarantee the legal case, or ensure that 90 families would keep their homes. It did not undo the 20 minutes she had spent being publicly humiliated while people took photos. But it was real, and she had earned it, and she was going to allow herself to feel it. Hartwell found her near the coat check as the evening concluded. He had the look of a man who had made a decision before approaching and was committed to it despite discomfort. The board convened briefly, he said, informally. In the side room. He cleared his throat. I wanted to address what happened here tonight on behalf of the foundation. Formally, as in a... Nia looked at him. The moment when Miss Harrow made her accusations, he said, and the subsequent handling by security that should not have proceeded the way it did. People in this room allowed something to happen that should have been interrupted 20 minutes before it was. He held her gaze, and, to his credit, he didn't look away from the plainness of what he was saying. The foundation failed you tonight. I failed you tonight, specifically. I saw what was happening, and I made a decision to not involve myself, and that decision was wrong, and I want to say that directly. Nia was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said. He stopped. I'd like to make a call tomorrow morning to the full donor list from this event. With your permission, to explain what happened, and to make sure no one leaves tonight with a version of events that misrepresents you or your organization. She thought about it. Yes, she said. Do that. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more, and she could see him deciding against it, recognizing that the time for more had probably been 2 hours ago, and what was left now was just the aftermath. Just the doing of the next right thing with whatever was available. He extended his hand. She shook it again. She found Roman near the main exit as the last staff began moving through the ballroom with the quiet efficiency of people preparing a space for tomorrow's ordinary usage, breaking down the particular temporary world that a formal event creates. He was holding her clutch, which she had left at the corner table during the Reeves conversation and forgotten entirely. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. Harrow filed a complaint with the hotel management an hour ago, Roman said. Something about the unauthorized use of the security footage on the main screens. His attorney called the on-site manager. What happened? I own the hotel, Roman said. The on-site manager called me. And I told him to document the complaint and file it with the legal department. He paused. Graham knows he's not going to win that one. It's noise. He's going to make noise for a while. I know he is, she said. My legal team is going to move on the shell company documentation this week, he said. Not on your timeline independent of your case. That matters for your case It creates a separate corroborating investigation that isn't attached to your name or your organization. You're going to move on it regardless, she said. Not a question. Yes, because it connects to Caldero business interests. Because 90 families, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. Both things can be true, he said. She thought about it. Yes, she said finally. They can. The last chandelier cluster above the stage dimmed as a staff member worked through the lighting panel, and the ballroom shifted into its post-event state beautiful still, but hollow now, the performance of the space visible once the people had left it. I have a question, she said. All right. The mezzanine, she said. Tonight, you were up there before any of it started. Before Vivienne approached me. Why were you at the gala at all? You said you weren't on the program. He was quiet for a moment. I knew you'd be here, he said. She processed that. Because of the investigation. Because of the investigation, he said. My team had flagged your organization as the most active documentation effort currently working the Linden Park District. When the gala program was announced and your name was on it, I wanted to... He paused. I wanted to assess whether you were what your file suggested. Assess me, she said. From a distance, he said. Without involving myself. That was the plan. Plans change, she said. They do, he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. There was something she needed to say, and she was deciding how to say it, which was how she operated with most things that mattered, not impulsively, not after too long, but in the specific moment when the words were ready. What you did tonight, she said, walking down those stairs. The footage. Standing there, she paused. It mattered. I want to be clear that I know it mattered, and that I'm grateful. You'd have found a way, he said. Maybe, she said. But this way was better. She looked at him steadily. I don't need you to minimize what you did in order to feel like you're respecting my agency. You helped, that's allowed. People helping is allowed. Something moved through his expression. Something genuine and slightly unguarded, like a window opened briefly in a building that keeps its windows shut. All right, he said quietly. All right, she said. She put her clutch under her arm. She thought about the lift she needed to order, and the drive across the city and her apartment, and the glass of water she was going to drink before anything else, standing at the kitchen sink in the dark, because she was desperately thirsty and had been too focused to stop for water for the last 3 hours. The conversation, she said, that you wanted, when I've slept. Yes. Call the initiative office, she said. Ask for Marcus. Tell him it's about a potential partnership and that you want to schedule 15 minutes. He'll give you 30. And after 30 minutes? I'll decide if you get more, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was close to one, and she thought that the full version, when it arrived, would probably be something worth seeing. She walked toward the exit. She walked through the same doors she had come through 7 hours ago when the city had been wet and lit and full of the sounds of an ordinary November evening. The doors were gold-handled and heavy and swung open smoothly on their expensive hinges. Outside, the air was cold, clean in the way Chicago air gets cold, clean after midnight, rinsed of the day, carrying nothing but itself. She stood on the sidewalk and ordered her lift and waited. 6 weeks later, the first story ran. Not in the largest paper, in a mid-size investigative outlet that had been doing housing beat reporting for 11 years and had been building a sourced piece on Southside displacement for the last month and a half. The reporter, a woman named Jackie Chen, who had been one of the people calling Nia's phone on the night of the gala, had been careful and thorough and had apparently had her own file on Harrow Development Shell Company structure for 7 months, without enough corroborating documentation to print. She had enough now. The story ran 4,000 words and named the companies and the beneficial owners, and included a statement from Catherine Reeves's office on behalf of 14 of the 17 families. It included a photograph of Loretta Gates, standing outside the building she had lived in for 31 years. Loretta's expression in the photograph was the expression of a woman who has decided that she is not going anywhere, and anyone who thinks otherwise has not been paying attention. The story was shared 14,000 times in the first 48 hours. The second story ran 3 days later, in the city's main paper, sourced from the Independent Investigation's documentation, and the Building Authority complaint records that the first story had pried loose. 2 city council members issued statements. Sandra Rhea held a press conference in the West Margrave district, standing in front of one of the affected buildings, and while Nia watched the footage of it, with the clear-eyed recognition that Reyes was performing concern rather than demonstrating it, she also acknowledged that performance with cameras could produce real outcomes if enough cameras were watching. More cameras were watching now. The Illinois Attorney General's office requested the documentation in week 3. This was the call Nia took at 9 in the morning, sitting at her desk in the office they had moved, quietly and quickly to a different building 2 weeks after the gala, with help from Arthur Pellman's foundation covering the lease gap, and when she hung up, she sat for a full minute doing nothing, because the specific gravity of what she had worked for had arrived, was real, had the weight of institutional response behind it. Then she called all 17 families, every single one, personally, starting with Loretta Gates. Loretta listened to everything and then said, "So it's real now? Somebody official is paying attention?" "Yes," Nia said. "Because I've heard that before," Loretta said. "I know you have," Nia said. "I know. I'm not telling you it's done. I'm telling you it's moving. And I'm going to keep calling you every time something happens. You'll know everything I know, when I know it." A pause on Loretta's end. "All right," Loretta said. "I'll take that." The partnership conversation with Roman happened not in 15 minutes or 30, but in 2 separate meetings across 2 weeks. The first was at the initiative's new office, with Marcus present, because Nia had decided that anything worth doing was worth doing transparently within her own organization. Roman came without a lawyer, which surprised her and then didn't surprise her. He came with a single document, which was a proposed framework, not a contract not yet, a framework that had been drafted by his legal team, but that he pushed across the table and said, "This is a starting point. Everything in it is negotiable. If there's something in here that compromises how you run the program, I want to know." Marcus read it in 17 minutes, which was faster than Nia had expected, and made 4 specific annotations in pencil in the margins, and pushed it back across the table and said, "These 4 points need to change, and then we'll talk." Roman looked at the annotations. He looked at Marcus. "Give me 2 days," he said. He came back in 1.5. The revised framework gave Nia's organization complete programmatic control. Caldero funding would flow through an unrestricted grant mechanism managed by the initiative's board, not Roman's office. Roman's legal division would provide tenant representation services on a pro bono basis through an existing nonprofit legal clinic that the Caldero family had funded for 9 years, which Nia investigated and found to be a genuinely operational organization with real case records, not a shell. Roman's name would not appear in any public documentation of the partnership. The second meeting was without Marcus, because the second meeting was not about the partnership structure. It was at a coffee place on the south side, not downtown, not expensive, Nia's neighborhood, and they sat across from each other with actual coffee and talked for 2 hours about the work. Not the logistics, not the legal framework, not what each of them needed from the arrangement. The work, what she'd seen in 3 years, what it actually looked like at 7 in the morning when a family came in with an eviction notice and 48 hours left on the clock. What it cost to carry 17 stories in your body for 8 months. What kept her coming back to an office with a broken printer and a budget that required her to be creative about the word salary. He listened in the way that some people listen, not waiting for his turn, not preparing responses, but actually following the thread of what she was saying and pulling on it, asking the follow-up questions that lived inside her answers. She told him about Loretta Gates, the real version, not the ballroom version. She told him about the October afternoon at Loretta's kitchen table, and the way the light came through the window at that hour, and the way Loretta's hands had looked wrapped around her coffee cup, and how Loretta had said, "Use it, baby. Use everything," and what it had cost Nia to hold that permission in her body for 6 weeks before she had a room to use it in. He was quiet for a moment after that. "That's why you rewrote the speech," he said. "On the back of the paper, at the table before you went up." She looked at him. You saw that. I was watching, he said. She thought about what it was being watched by this man. Not surveilled. Watched in the way you watch something you are paying attention to, because it matters. Yes, she said, that's why. Graham Harrow did not go quietly. He didn't go dramatically either. There was no public confession, no cinematic collapse, no single moment where everything resolved into clean accountability. That was not how 40-year empires, with serious legal teams and political relationships and $40 million in available capital, actually dissolved. They dissolved slowly, through the grinding mechanisms of investigation and litigation and reputational erosion. And the grinding took time. And the time was not satisfying in the way that a film resolution is satisfying. But it was real, and real was worth more. What happened was this. Harrow Development's 3 pending city contracts were placed under review in week 4 of the coverage. 2 of the shell companies, River North Holdings and Meridian Property Solutions, were the subject of a beneficial ownership investigation by the state AG's office by week 7. 2 of Graham's longest business partners, men who had sat at that gala table and watched and calculated and determined it was safer to stay quiet, quietly redirected their capital investment timelines in week 8 in ways that Graham's financial team would have understood immediately. The Harrow attorneys were busy. Vivienne had retained her own, separate counsel for the theft accusation documentation that had been filed formally, with the gala security footage as supporting evidence. And the matter was working its way through a process that her counsel was trying to make as slow and quiet as possible, and that Reeves's office was trying to keep moving. None of it was over. All of it was in motion. And 41 of the 90 families received formal notification that relocation proceedings against them were being paused pending legal review, which was not vindication and was not permanence, but was a door staying open that had been closing. And Nia understood that keeping a door open is not the same as winning, but it is not nothing. And she had spent her career understanding the precise weight and value of not nothing. On a Tuesday morning in February, 3 months after the Valancourt Gala, Nia Bellamy arrived at her office an hour before anyone else. She did this, sometimes needed the quiet of the space before the day filled it, before the phones and the intake appointments and the particular relentless urgent need of the work claimed every available square inch of air. The new office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Halstead, bright in the morning, with windows that faced east. The printer worked. There were 4 more desks than the previous office. There was a small meeting room with a proper door that closed. She made coffee, the actual kind, not the budget kind. That had been possible since Arthur Pellman's foundation grant had cleared, and she allowed herself the specific small pleasure of it every morning as a private acknowledgement that some things had changed. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the file. She kept on all current clients, not the database, not the formal records, but her own running document, the one that only she accessed, where she kept the actual notes. The human notes. What Loretta Gates's kitchen smelled like. What Marcus had said when he'd called her from outside the broken-into office. The exact way his voice had sounded careful to protect her from the information he was delivering, and how that carefulness had cost him something. She added a note from a call she'd made the previous afternoon. A woman named Patricia Dunn, 39 years old, 3 kids, an apartment in West Margrave that had been the subject of a selective lease enforcement action 8 months ago. Patricia Dunn, he had called the initiative 2 months ago, found their number from the newspaper coverage, and had been working with a staff advocate since then. Yesterday, Patricia had called to say that the enforcement action had been formally withdrawn. The note Nia wrote, read, Patricia called, enforcement withdrawn. She cried on the phone. I let her. She said thank you about 6 times, and then she said, actually, I think I'll say it one more time. And then she laughed. First time I've heard her laugh. Add to active monitoring list withdrawal. Doesn't close the file. She read it back. She left it as it was. Outside the east-facing windows, the February light was doing the thing it does in Chicago, in winter, pale and thin, and arriving at a low angle, honest about how little warmth it was bringing, making no promises. She had grown up with this light. She had learned to read it without romanticizing it. There was a kind of beauty in it that had nothing to do with comfort. That was just the city being what it was, real and cold and present. Her phone buzzed. A text from Denise. Did you eat breakfast? She typed back, "I'm having coffee." Denise's response. That is not breakfast, Nia Bellamy. She set the phone face down on the desk. She was smiling. 2 weeks after that Tuesday, on a Friday evening, Nia was the last one out of the office. She locked up new locks, good locks, the kind that required a key and a code, and walked down the stairs and out, onto Halsted, and into the early dark of a February evening. Roman was leaning against a car parked at the curb. Not a flashy car, just a car. He was in a jacket that was not the one he had put around her shoulders in the ballroom, that one she had returned in the corridor, before she'd walked back to the gala, and he looked, in the flat outdoor light of a Chicago winter evening, like a man who had places he could be and had decided to be here instead. She had known he would be there. He had texted an hour before. Is it all right if I come by the office tonight? Nothing urgent, and she had said yes. She had known then, and she knew now, what she thought about that. She had been turning it over for 3 months, with the careful, skeptical, unhurried attention. She gave everything that mattered to her. She had examined it for strings. She had asked herself, honestly and repeatedly, whether what she felt was the specific vulnerability of a woman who had been rescued in a public way and was confusing gratitude for something else. She didn't think it was that. She thought it was something more basic. Something less convenient than gratitude and less dramatic than whatever the films would make it. She thought it was simply the recognition of a person who had been paying attention to her, not to her body, or her credentials, or her usefulness, but to her, to the way her mind worked and what she cared about, and what it cost her to do the things she did. She had not been looked at that way in long enough that she'd stopped expecting it. She had decided, going to be honest, about what that meant to her. Not loudly, not immediately, but honestly. Hey, she said. Hey, he said. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The city moved around them in its ordinary way, cars, someone walking a dog, the sound of music from a bar down the block, the distant rhythm of the L. You want to get dinner, he said. I need actual dinner, she said. Not somewhere downtown. Somewhere here. You know a place? Several, she said. Depending on what you want. Surprise me, he said. She looked at him. She thought about the jacket placed around her shoulders 3 months ago. She thought about "Are you hurt?" and what it had meant that he hadn't said. Are you okay? She thought about a man standing at the mezzanine railing, watching a room with the patient attention of someone who believes that what he sees matters. She thought about Loretta Gates saying, "Use it, baby. Use everything." She thought about herself. In that corridor, standing in the cold light with her back against the wall and her hands stopped shaking, standing up, which was the best she'd been able to give Denise and which had turned out to be enough. Come on, then, she said. They walked down Halsted together in the winter dark, 2 people in a city that didn't care who they were or what they'd been through, moving forward in the specific, ordinary way of people who have decided to keep moving. The streetlights came on as they walked. The city held them, the way the city holds everyone without warmth, without cruelty, just present, just real. Just the ground under their feet and the air they were breathing, and the next block, and the next. All of it continuing the way life continues after the extraordinary moments pass, quietly, with everything still to be done, and enough will to do it. Nia Bellamy walked with her head up, the way she always had, the way she always would.